My name is Margaret Ann Calloway. I am 39 years old. And on the afternoon of March 14th, 2019, my parents stood up from the third pew of St. Agatha's Catholic Church on Birchwood Avenue in Denton, Texas, put on their coats, and walked out of my daughter's funeral before the priest finished the final blessing. My daughter's name was Lily Rose Calloway. She was 4 years and 2 months old. She died on March 9th, 2019 at Children's Medical Center Dallas on Harry Hines Boulevard at 11:47 in the evening from complications following a surgery to repair a congenital heart defect she had carried since birth. I state these facts first because I have learned in the 5 years since that night that facts are what hold, not feelings. Not the versions of events that other people carry in their own minds and defend over Sunday dinners and in group texts I am no longer part of. Facts hold, dates hold, the name on the death certificate holds, the time recorded in the medical chart holds. I am a licensed occupational therapist. I have worked at Baylor Scott and White Medical Center in Plano, Texas since 2013. I know how to write a clinical note. I know how to document what I observed in sequence without editorializing and let the record speak. What follows is the record. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. This is where we share real-life inspired tales of family conflict, betrayal, and the quiet strength it takes to stand your ground. If these stories speak to you, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I will begin at the beginnings. March 9th, 2019 was a Thursday. I had been at Children's Medical Center since the previous Sunday when Lily was admitted for pre-surgical monitoring. The procedure she needed was called a ventricular septal defect repair. The hole in her heart had been identified during a routine ultrasound when I was 28 weeks pregnant in April of 2014. The cardiologist who managed her care from infancy was a woman named Dr. Rita Acaffer, whose office was on Forest Lane in Dallas. Dr. Acaffer had been watching the defect for 4 years with the particular patience of someone who has seen enough cases to know when waiting is the right intervention and when it is not. By January of 2019, she determined it was not. She referred us to Dr. Amara Nwasu, a pediatric cardiac surgeon with offices at Children's Medical Center, for evaluation and planning. I have Dr. Akaffer's card. I have Dr. Nwasu's card. I have the pre-surgical consent forms and the surgical risk disclosure and the anesthesia consent and the contact information for the hospital social worker who met with me on the Sunday Lily was admitted. I have them in a blue accordion folder in my home office closet at 1847 Clearwater Drive in Allen, Texas, the house I purchased in October of 2021 for $312,000. I have kept everything. I want to also say, before I go further, that the accumulation of these documents was not something I undertook with any particular foresight. I did not know in March of 2019 that I would one day be sitting at a kitchen table composing an account of these events. I kept documents because I have always kept documents. I became a person who keeps documents in 2014, when Lily was diagnosed, and I have been that person ever since. Because what I learned in 2014 is that the moments when you most need a piece of paper are always the moments when the piece of paper is not where you expected it to be, and so you learn to put it somewhere deliberate. My ex-husband, Daniel Holt, was at the hospital with me from Sunday through Thursday. We had been separated since January of 2018, 14 months before Lily died. The separation was mutual in the sense that we had both arrived, independently and without drama, at the understanding that we were no longer the people each of us had needed us to be. We had a daughter with a serious medical condition, and we had made a shared decision in February of 2018 that whatever was happening between us as a couple could not be allowed to compromise our ability to coordinate Lily's care. We remained in daily contact. He attended every cardiology appointment in 2018 and 2019. He sat in that hospital room for 4 days and never once left me alone in it, and I want that on the record because it matters to what follows. My parents are Robert and Patricia Calloway. My father is 68 years old. He retired in 2016 from a position as district manager for a regional insurance company headquartered in Fort Worth. He had worked for that company for 31 years. He coached my soccer team when I was 8 and 9 and 10, and he made the same macaroni and cheese every Sunday night throughout my childhood, and he drove me to the ACT testing center in Denton when I was 17, and said before I got out of the car that he was proud of me. Regardless of how it went, he is not a cold man. I want that on the record also because this account requires precision about who these people are, not just what they did. My mother is 66. She taught second grade at Ridgeline Elementary in Denton for 22 years and is regarded in her community as a patient and loving woman. She has a cross-stitch of Psalm 46 above her kitchen sink. She has brought casseroles to every grieving family in her church circle for 30 years. She is the kind of woman who remembers the anniversary of your mother's death and calls to check on you, the kind of woman other women describe as a gift, the kind of woman who does not raise her voice and does not forget a birthday and believes sincerely in the transformative power of showing up. I want that on the record too, because it matters to what came next, that she is a person who understands perfectly well what showing up means. Lily's surgery was scheduled for March 9th at 6 in the morning. I arrived at the hospital at 5. I did not sleep the night before. I sat in the chair by Lily's bed from midnight until 4:30, watching her sleep the specific sleep of a child who does not know what is about to happen, which is the deepest kind of sleep there is. At 4:30, I went to the family restroom on the second floor and washed my face and changed my shirt and came back and sat in the chair again. At 5, Lily woke up and looked at me and said, "Is today the heart day?" I said yes. She said okay and held out her arms, and I picked her up and held her, and she put her face against my neck. She had fine blonde hair and she smelled like hospital shampoo by then, but underneath it she still smelled like herself. I held her until the pre-op nurse came at 5:30. Daniel arrived at 5:15. He stood in the doorway for a moment and then he came and sat in the other chair, and we looked at each other and did not say anything. There was nothing to say that was adequate to the moment, and we both knew it, and so we were quiet, which was the right call. My parents arrived at 6:45. The surgical team had already taken Lily back at 6:08. My mother came through the waiting room door first, holding her purse with both hands. She asked if we had heard anything. I said no, not yet, they just took her. My father was behind her. He nodded at Daniel. He went to get coffee from the machine in the hallway. Came back with 3 cups even though no one had asked for one. We sat in the waiting room. The chairs were upholstered in a dark teal fabric. The television on the wall was tuned to a morning news program with the sound off and the closed captions running. My mother took out her rosary. My father read a magazine about home improvement that he had found on the side table, and he turned the pages without appearing to read any of it. Daniel had his phone out, but he was not looking at it either. I sat with my hands in my lap and I watched the door at the end of the hallway, the one the nurses came through, because that was the door that mattered and I did not want to be looking anywhere else when it opened. The surgery lasted 9 hours and 11 minutes. I know this because I have the surgical report. The report is in the blue accordion folder behind the consent forms. At approximately 3:40 in the afternoon, Dr. Nwasu came through the door at the end of the hallway. She was still in her scrubs. She walked toward us with the specific pace of a physician who is about to deliver news that she has delivered before and does not deliver lightly. I stood up. Daniel stood up beside me. My parents rose a moment later. Dr. Nwasu said there had been a complication during the repair. She used the phrase hemodynamic instability. She explained what that meant, that Lily's blood pressure had become difficult to manage during the procedure, that they had responded with medication and monitoring, that Lily was stable at this moment, but that the next several hours were critical and she would need to remain in the pediatric cardiac intensive care unit for observation. She said she would come back when she had more information. I was holding a paper cup of coffee that had been handed to me at some point during the afternoon. I set it on the table next to my chair. I did not pick it up again. My mother put her hand on my arm. My father put his hand on my shoulder. I stood in the middle of that and I thought about the word stable, which is a word that has a clinical meaning and a colloquial meaning, and in that moment I needed very badly to know which one Dr. Nwasu intended. And then I thought about the fact that she had said critical, and I understood that regardless of the meaning of stable, critical was the word that required my attention. I want to be precise about one thing here. My parents were present when Dr. Nwasu gave us this information. They heard what she said. They understood what it meant. I am establishing this because what happened next matters in context, and the context includes their full knowledge of the situation. What followed was approximately 6 hours in which Lily was in the pediatric cardiac intensive care unit, and I was allowed in to see her in 20-minute intervals. The PCICU is a unit with a particular quality of stillness. The sounds in it are mechanical. The lights are kept low. Each bay has its own set of monitors, and each monitor has its own set of numbers, and you learn very quickly which numbers matter and what their acceptable ranges are because the nurses will tell you if you ask, and I asked. I asked every time. I wrote the numbers in a small notebook I had in my coat pocket. Daniel and I took turns, 20 minutes in, 20 minutes in the family waiting area. My parents stayed in the family waiting area throughout this period. At approximately 8 in the evening, my mother went to the vending machine and came back with crackers and a granola bar and set them on the seat beside me without comment. I did not eat them. At approximately 9:15, my father said that he needed to get home because he had a doctor's appointment the following morning. I want to be careful about how I document this moment. My father said he had a doctor's appointment the following morning and that he needed to get some sleep before it. He said it quietly and he was looking at the floor when he said it. My mother said she was going to drive him home and she would call me in the morning. She stood up and she collected her coat and her purse. She came to me and she put her hand on my face, just for a moment, the way she used to do when I was a child, and she was trying to communicate something she did not have words for. Then she and my father walked out of the family waiting area and down the hallway and through the door to the elevator bank. I noted the time, 9:47. The reason I noted the time was not premeditation. I have always noted times. I noted the time Lily went into surgery and the time Dr. Nwasu came out and the time each of my 20-minute visits to the PCICU began and ended. Noting the time my parents left was automatic. What I did with that notation later was a separate decision. Daniel came back from one of his visits at 10:30 and found me sitting in the same chair. With the crackers still on the seat beside me, he sat down. He did not ask about my parents. He looked at me and then he looked at the door at the end of the hallway and we sat like that together for a while. At 11:23, the PCICU nurse, whose name was Sandra, came through the door and walked toward us with the same specific pace that Dr. Nwasu had used earlier in the afternoon, and I understood before she said anything that the numbers on the monitors had changed. Lily died at 11:47. Daniel was with me. Sandra held my left hand. I could feel the bones in my own hand under her grip, the specific articulation of my own knuckles, which is the thing I remember most clearly from those minutes, the particular shape of my own hand under someone else's, and the sound of the monitors going to a single flat tone and then the silence after a nurse turned it off. I called my parents at 12:14 in the morning. I was in the family waiting area. Daniel was standing at the window which looked out onto the parking garage. My father answered on the second ring. I told him what had happened. He said, "Oh my God." He said it the way a person says something when the wind has gone out of them. He said, "Oh my God, Margaret." He said he was sorry. He said it 3 times, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," and then he said he would call me in the morning. I said thank you. I said good night. I set my phone face down on the table. I sat in the family waiting area of Children's Medical Center Dallas on Harry Hines Boulevard until approximately 2 in the morning. Daniel stayed with me. At 2, we went and said goodbye to Lily, which was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life and which I will not document in detail because it belongs to me and to Daniel and to no one else. Then we walked out through the lobby and into the parking structure, and I drove home to my apartment on Greenville Avenue in Dallas, which I had moved to in February of 2018 after Daniel and I separated, and I sat in the parking lot for a while before going inside. I did not hear from my mother until 10 the following morning, March 10th. She called to ask about funeral arrangements. She said she was sorry. She said she wanted to help. She asked whether I had spoken to a funeral home yet. I said no. She said she knew the director at Meadowbrook Funeral Services on University Drive in Denton, that our family had used them before and she could make some calls if I wanted. I said that would be fine. She said she would also handle the flowers, that she knew a woman at the church who did arrangements at cost and it would be beautiful. I said thank you. I said I would let her know about the service details as soon as I had them. I want to note that this phone call was organized and competent. My mother was not unkind. She was doing what she knows how to do in a crisis, which is logistics. She has managed the practical details of grief for other families for 3 decades, and she is good at it. I do not dispute that she was trying to help in the way she knew how to help. I also want to note that she did not ask how I was doing, not once during that phone call. The funeral was arranged over the following 3 days. I met with the director at Meadowbrook, a man named Gerald Harrison, on March 11th. I selected the casket. It was white with brass handles, 61 centimeters in length. I selected the ceremony program, which was a single piece of white cardstock, folded, with Lily's name in a script font on the front and the text of the ceremony on the inside. Gerald Harrison asked if I wanted a photograph of Lily on the front of the program. I said no. I said I wanted just her name. The funeral home printed 12 copies. I requested 12 specifically. I have all 12. I placed Percy in the casket with Lily. Percy was a small lavender stuffed rabbit she had been given at her baby shower by a woman who worked with me at Baylor Scott and White, a woman named Deborah Cheng who had a particular gift for knowing what a child would love. Lily had slept with Percy every night of her life. I tucked him under her right arm with the care you give to something that cannot be fixed if you do it wrong. The service was held on March 14th, 2019 at 2 in the afternoon at St. Agatha's Catholic Church on Birchwood Avenue in Denton. I grew up attending that church. My grandmother Margaret, for whom I was named, was married there in 1956. My parents are still registered members of that parish. Father Michael Donovan presided. He is a tall man with white hair and the particular steadiness of someone who has stood at the front of a room like that many times before. There were 43 people at that funeral. I know because I counted. I counted as they came through the doors. I was standing in the narthex when people arrived and I counted. It is what I do. I sat in the first pew with Daniel. My mother's sister Celia, who is my Aunt Celia, sat directly behind me. Daniel's parents, Raymond and Gloria Holt, sat to my right. My parents sat in the third pew on the left side of the nave. I saw them come in. My mother was in a black dress with a gray cardigan over it. My father was in his navy suit, the one he wears to weddings and funerals and the kind of occasion that requires being formal without being conspicuous. They settled into the third pew and my mother opened her purse and took out her rosary, the same rosary she had at the hospital. Father Donovan spoke for 22 minutes. He read from the Book of Wisdom, chapter 3, verses 1 through 9. The souls of the just are in the hand of God, and no torment shall touch them. He spoke about the innocence of children and the grace of God and the eternal nature of the love we carry for those we lose. I sat in the first pew and I looked at the white casket. I thought about Percy inside it. I thought about the fact that Percy was in the dark, and that Lily was not afraid of the dark, but that Percy had always been the thing she held when she was. And I thought about whether that was a comfort, and I did not determine an answer. I did not cry during the service. This is not a statement of strength. It is a statement of fact. I was past the point where crying was the relevant response. I was in a place that was beyond crying, a place that felt like the inside of something very still and very cold and very quiet. I have learned since that this is a recognized grief response. My therapist, Janet Rios, on Legacy Drive in Plano, described it to me 6 months later as the body's protective shutdown, a kind of sensory dimming when the nervous system does not have the resources to process what is happening in real time. I think she is right. At approximately 2:38, while Father Donovan was in the final portion of the service, preparing to move into the final blessing, I heard movement behind me. I want to document this sequence precisely because I was in the first pew and could not see the third pew from where I was sitting without turning around, and so what I experienced was auditory. I heard the soft sound of a coat being lifted, the rustling of fabric. I heard what I recognized as the sound of a zipper, slow and deliberate, the kind of sound a person makes when they are trying not to make noise but are not entirely succeeding. I heard the low creak of a wooden pew as weight shifted off it. I heard two sets of footsteps, quiet but present, moving across the stone floor of the nave toward the rear of the church. And then I heard the heavy wooden door at the back of the church open with the particular groan of old hinges that I have known since I was a child in that building, and then I heard it close. Father Donovan finished the final blessing at 2:41. When I turned around, the third pew on the left side of the nave was empty. Daniel was beside me and he had heard it too because I saw him look at the empty pew and then look at me and then look back at the altar. He did not say anything. He put his hand on my arm. I looked at his hand on my arm and I thought they left, and then I thought they left during the final blessing, and then I stopped thinking because the service was ending and there were things I needed to do. I will now document precisely what I did not do. I did not turn to Daniel and say anything about it in that moment. I did not call my parents on the way to the graveside service at Roselawn Memorial Cemetery on Teasley Lane. I did not mention it to Aunt Celia, who drove with me. I did not mention it at the reception at Meadowbrook afterward, where there were sandwiches and coffee and 41 of the 43 people who had been at the church, my parents not among them. I noted their absence, I filed it, I did not mention it. The drive from St. Agatha's to my parents' house on Remington Road in Denton is 7 minutes. I have driven it more times than I can count. I drove it every Sunday of my childhood. There is no traffic on a Thursday afternoon in March that would require leaving a funeral service before the blessing had been given. I am establishing this because I want the record to reflect that I am not working from assumption. I know that route and I know its timing. I did not call my parents that night. I went back to my apartment on Greenville Avenue and I sat on my kitchen floor for a while because the couch seemed too far away. Daniel drove me and came in and sat on the kitchen floor with me without being asked. That is the kind of person Daniel Holt is, and I want that on the record. My parents called me on March 17th, a Sunday, 3 days after the funeral. My mother called. She said she hoped I was resting. She said she was sorry. She Said it had been a hard few days for all of them. Then she said she was sorry they had to leave early on Thursday. That is the word she used, early. She said Daddy had not been feeling well and she had thought it was best to get him home. I wrote the word early on a yellow legal pad after I hung up. I underlined it. I did not know at the time that this was the beginning of a documentation practice. I thought I was just writing down a word that was bothering me, but I dated the page. I always date pages. She asked how I was doing. I said I was managing. She said to let her know if I needed anything. I said I would. I said thank you for calling. I said goodbye and I hung up. The word early. The service began at 2. Father Donovan finished at 2:41. My parents left at approximately 2:38. They left 3 minutes before the end of a 22-minute service after sitting through 19 of it. In what calendar of departure does 3 minutes before the end constitute early? That is not what early means. Early means before it was time, before something was finished. Not 3 minutes before something was finished. There is a different word for that. I did not say this to my mother. I said thank you for calling. They called 4 more times over the following 6 weeks. I answered twice. The conversations were brief. My mother asked if I was eating. My father asked if I had everything I needed. I said yes to both questions. I did not ask them anything in return because I did not have the capacity at that time to manage the conversation that would follow any honest question. On May 2nd, 2019, they called on a Tuesday morning and I looked at the phone and did not pick it up. I did not pick it up the next time either. After the third unanswered call in June of 2019, they stopped calling. I want to note that they stopped calling. They did not leave messages after the third unanswered call. They stopped. I am including this in the record because the decision to stop is a decision, the same as the decision to call is a decision, and both decisions are part of the documented pattern. I will now document what I did in the period between March 2019 and March 9th, 2024, the day this account is principally concerned with. In April of 2019, I returned to work at Baylor Scott and White on a reduced schedule of 20 hours per week. My supervisor at the time, a woman named Carolyn Marks, arranged the reduced hours without my having to formally request them. She sent me an email on March 25th that said, "Take the time you need, we will figure out the rest," and I have kept that email. I was back to full-time by June. In July of 2019, I moved out of the apartment on Greenville Avenue. It was a 2-bedroom apartment and Lily had the second bedroom and the walls were still painted the pale yellow that I had painted them in 2016 with the small cloud shapes I had stenciled at her eye level when she was 2 and I was not able to walk past that room. I moved to a 1-bedroom apartment on McDermott Road in Allen. The rent was $1,120 a month. I signed a 12-month lease. In September of 2019, I began attending a grief support group at Presbyterian Hospital on Walnut Hill Lane in Dallas. The group met on Tuesday evenings at 6:30. The facilitator was a licensed clinical social worker named Diane Mercer, whose office was in the suite at the end of the third-floor hallway. Diane never told me what to feel or when to feel it. She told me to document. She said grief has a way of revising itself over time, and that when you document, you give yourself something to compare the revision against. She said the thing you feel about a person at 6 months is never exactly the thing you feel about them at 2 years, and having a record of both things is a way of being fair to yourself. I attended that group for 2 years and 3 months. In December of 2019, I received a letter from Meadowbrook Funeral Services advising me that the 1-year maintenance agreement on Lily's grave site was expiring and asking whether I wished to renew. I renewed for 5 years at a cost of $340 per year. I pay this every December. I have the receipts. In January of 2020, I was promoted to senior therapist at Baylor Scott and White, with a salary increase to $78,000 annually. I negotiated that salary myself. I went into the meeting with my supervisor's supervisor, a man named David Chu, and I presented the outcomes data from my patient caseload over the preceding 3 years, and I made the case for the number I wanted, and he agreed to it. I want that on the record. In March of 2020, I attended a continuing education conference at the Austin Convention Center on the topic of pediatric occupational therapy and emerging practice models. On the first evening of the conference, there was a reception in the main hall. I was standing by a window with a glass of water when a man at the table next to me asked if I knew anything about the speaker who had just presented. I said I had not caught her talk. He said she had made a compelling argument for re-examining the role of sensory integration in school-based settings. I said that was a topic I had opinions about. We talked for 45 minutes. His name was Calvin James Whitmore. He is 41 years old. He is a licensed physical therapist with a practice on Preston Road in Frisco. He grew up in Beaumont, Texas, the oldest of three children, and moved to the Dallas area in 2009 after completing his doctorate at UT Health San Antonio. He is patient in a way that is not performed. He does not explain himself more than necessary. He listens the way a person listens who is genuinely interested in what the other person is saying, not waiting for a pause to respond. We exchanged cards at the end of the conference. He called me 2 weeks later. We had dinner at a restaurant on Lower Greenville Avenue in Dallas in April of 2020 at the beginning of the period when restaurants were open for outdoor seating only, and we sat at a table on the sidewalk with space heaters on either side and talked for 3 hours. I told him about Lily on our second dinner. I did not work up to it or prepare him. I said I had a daughter who died in 2019. She was 4. Her name was Lily. He said, "I'm sorry." He said, "Tell me about her," and I did. He is the first person I have known who does not require me to explain why I write things down. In November of 2020, Calvin and I began a committed relationship. In October of 2021, we purchased the house on Clearwater Drive in Allen for $312,000. It has 4 bedrooms, which we did not need but which we bought because we understood ourselves to be in a period of building. In October of 2022, we were married at the Allen Heritage Garden on Exchange Parkway. 14 people attended. It was a Saturday morning ceremony. The officiant was a judge I had met through Diane Mercer's recommendation. The flowers were white and pale green and cost $480. Daniel Holt attended and sat in the second row and did not speak unless spoken to, and I was glad he was there. In December of 2022, I learned that I was pregnant. I sat on the bathroom floor of the house on Clearwater Drive at 5:45 in the morning on December 12, 2022, with the test in my hand, and I felt something that I am not going to name directly, but that began in my chest and spread in both directions and lasted for a long time. It was not uncomplicated. It has never been uncomplicated. I am not going to pretend in this account that it was uncomplicated. I called Diane Mercer that morning, even though I was not currently in active sessions with her, and left a message saying I needed to talk. She called back within the hour. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "How are you feeling in your body right now?" I said I felt like I was very far inside myself and also very far outside of myself at the same time. She said that made sense. She said to give it some time before I tried to understand what I was feeling, because understanding would be available to me later, but the feeling was only available to me right now, and I should let it be what it was. My son, Thomas Robert Whitmore, was born on August 4, 2023 at Medical City Allen on East Exchange Parkway at 6:22 in the morning. He weighed 7 pounds and 11 ounces. His first cry was the high, certain kind of cry that the nurses say is a good sign, a full lungs cry. Calvin was beside me. He put his head down on the bed next to me and did not move for a long time. Thomas's middle name is Robert. I chose it because it was my father's name and because at the time of choosing it, in the spring of 2023, I had not yet made a decision about my parents and I did not want to make a permanent decision in either direction through an omission. Robert is a name that holds a place open. It is also my grandfather's name and my great-uncle's name, and it has been in my family long enough that it does not belong solely to my father. I gave Thomas this name and I have not told my father it is his name. That is not a deception, it is an open door. He has Lily's nose, the slightly upturned tip, the particular narrowness across the bridge. I noticed it in the first hour and I have never said it to anyone, not to Calvin, not to Diane, not to Janet Rios. Some things are just yours. On the morning of March 9, 2024, which was a Saturday, I was at my kitchen table at 6:45. Calvin was upstairs with Thomas. I had my coffee. On the table in front of me was one of Lily's funeral programs, the one I take out every March 9 and set somewhere visible. It is a single folded piece of white cardstock, her name in script on the front, and it is one of 12 copies I have kept since 2019. I have them in the blue accordion folder in the closet, and every March 9 I take one out and I set it on the table and I let the day be what the day is. At 7:03 my phone rang. The number on the screen was my parents' landline on Remington Road in Denton. That number has not changed in 34 years. I know it the way I know my own name. I did not answer. At 7:09 there was a voicemail notification. I sat at the table. I did not touch the phone. I looked at the funeral program on the table and I looked at my coffee and I looked at the morning light coming through the kitchen window, the way it was angling across the floor tiles, and I did not listen to the voicemail. Calvin came downstairs at 7:30 with Thomas in his arms. Thomas was in a yellow onesie with snaps down the front and his eyes were still half closed with sleep. Calvin looked at the phone on the table and then at the program next to it and then at me. He did not say what he was thinking. He poured himself coffee and sat down across from me. He said, "How are you doing this morning?" I said I was okay. He looked at the phone. He said, "Do you want to listen to it together?" I said, "Not yet." He nodded. He put Thomas in the high chair and began cutting up a banana into small pieces with the particular care he brings to all physical tasks, each piece the same size. Thomas put a piece of banana in his mouth and looked at me with the expression he has that I can only describe as analytical, as though he is filing information. Something in my chest went hollow and then very full and then settled. I listened to the voicemail at 9:17 after Calvin had taken Thomas to Bethany Lakes Park on Bethany Drive, which is 7 minutes from our house. He goes there on weekend mornings when the weather is right. He took Thomas without asking me if I needed space. He just went. That is another thing I want documented. The voicemail was my mother's voice. She said good morning. She said she hoped I was well. She said she and Daddy had been thinking about me on this particular day. She paused for a moment. She said, "We know it has been a long time." She said she had heard through Celia that I had had a baby, a little boy, she said. Her and Daddy would very much like to meet him if I was open to that when the time felt right for me. She said she knew there was a lot that would need to be talked through and they were open to that process. She said they missed me. She said to call her when I was ready. She did not say Lily's name. I set the phone face down on the table. I sat with what I had just heard for a long time, long enough that I finished my coffee, which had gone cold, and I got up and refilled it and came back and sat down again. I looked at the funeral program with Lily's name on the front. I thought about the word ready, which my mother had used at the end of the message when I was ready. I thought about the particular grammar of that phrase, which frames readiness as a state the listener needs to achieve, not as something the speaker needs to wait for without condition. I thought about the word heard I had heard through Celia, which meant she had been receiving information about my life for 5 years through a channel I had not explicitly authorized, and which meant the first direct communication she had made to me in 5 years was predicated on information gathered indirectly. I thought about the fact that this message arrived on March 9th, the anniversary of the day Lily died. Either my mother knew it was that day and chose it deliberately, or she knew and did not account for it, or she did not know. All three possibilities say something, and I sat with all three. I sat at the table for 41 minutes after listening to that voicemail. Then I called Janet Rios. Janet has had her practice on Legacy Drive in Plano since 2010. I was referred to her by Dr. Akafer in 2016 when Lily's care plan began requiring surgical evaluation, and Dr. Akafer felt correctly that I needed consistent support through what was ahead. Janet charges $140 per session. My insurance covers 60%. I have never missed an appointment, and I have never canceled with less than 24 hours notice. I bring my yellow legal pad to every session. Janet has never once commented on this. She accepts the fact of the legal pad the way she accepts all things about a person in front of her as given data. She answered on the second ring. I told her about the voicemail. I read it back to her from memory, which I am able to do because I listened to it 3 times before I put the phone down. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "What do you want to do?" I said I did not know yet. She said that is a legitimate answer. I said I wanted to document my thoughts before I made any decision. She said that also sounds like you. I told her I was going to speak with Calvin tonight and that I would call her after that. She said to take the time I needed. She said the message had waited 5 years to arrive, which meant it could wait a few more days for a response. I said that was true. I said goodbye and I hung up. Have you ever received a message from someone who left you alone at the worst moment of your life and felt in that same moment the pull in both directions, toward them and away from them at exactly the same time? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time, because what happens next is the part I've been building toward this whole time. Calvin and I talked that evening on the back porch. The temperature was 51 degrees. He had his mug of tea and I had coffee that I let go cold again. Thomas was in bed. I had 19 pages of notes in the yellow legal pad and I had them on the table between us. I said I want to be precise about what I am thinking, and then I want to hear what you think, and then I want to sit with both of those things before I do anything. He said, "Go ahead." I read him the notes. I read them in sequence. The voicemail and what was in it and what was not in it. The timeline from 2019 to 2024 documented my parents' specific actions, the night they left the hospital, the departure from the funeral, the word early, the 4 phone calls, the silence that followed, the information gathered through Celia rather than direct contact. I read all of it and he listened to all of it. When I finished, he set his mug down. He said, "What did they do exactly? Not in terms of how it felt to you, in terms of what they did physically, specifically." I went back through the notes and I read him just the actions, no interpretations. The time they arrived at the hospital on March 9th, the time they left, the sound of the pew in the church, the sound of the door, the word early on March 17th, the 4 calls, the silence from June 2019 onward, the voicemail on the 5th anniversary. He was quiet for a while, then he said, "What does the documented record tell you?" I said, "The documented record tells me that they are people who leave when the circumstances are hardest to bear and return when things have stabilized. It tells me they have been tracking information about my life for 5 years through a secondary source. It tells me the voicemail contains no mention of Lily, no apology, no acknowledgement of what occurred. It tells me they framed the contact as something they are extending to me, an offer, rather than a request they are making of me." He said, "And what else?" I said, "And Thomas is 7 months old, and my parents are 68 and 66, and Thomas's relationship to his extended family is not something only I get to determine. That is you and eventually him. And the people who left that hospital in 2019 are also the people who came to that hospital in 2019 and sat there for 9 hours and left before the end and also came in the first place. Both of those things are true." He said, "Do you want to let them back in?" I said I did not know yet if I was in a position to want something that complicated. I said what I wanted right now was to make a decision that I could defend to myself in 10 years. That was the standard I was trying to meet. He said, "Then you know what to do." I said I thought I did. I made 2 calls on the morning of Monday, March 11th, 2024. The first was to Aunt Celia. Celia is 63, my mother's younger sister. She lives in Garland and has lived there since 1987. She was at my wedding. She met Thomas at Christmas. She is not a person I removed from my life after 2019, and I want to document why, because the reason is not carelessness. I kept Celia because her relationship with me is separate from her relationship with my parents, and because I believe relationships can be compartmentalized when the people involved are capable of understanding that compartmentalization. I was not certain Celia was capable of it, but I chose to allow her the opportunity. I called her at 9 in the morning and I told her directly that I understood she had been passing information about me to my parents, and I asked her to stop. I said I was not ending my relationship with her, but I needed her to understand that this was a boundary I was now making explicit. I said I was not angry at her. I was clarifying a situation that had been unclear. She was quiet for a moment, then she said she had not thought about how it might feel to me to know that information was going in a direction I hadn't sanctioned. She said she had thought she was helping. She said she was sorry. I said I appreciated her hearing it. I said we would talk soon. I hung up. The second call was to my parents' landline on Remington Road. My mother answered on the third ring. She said my name in the way she has always said my name, the same cadence she used when I came through the back door after school, and I pressed my hand flat on the kitchen table and waited for whatever that produced in my chest to settle before I spoke. I said I received your voicemail. I said I wanted to respond directly. I said I had some things I needed to say, and I asked if she would let me say them without interrupting. She said, "Of course, Margaret." She said, "Of course." I said, on March 9th, 2019, our daughter Lily Rose Calloway died at Children's Medical Center Dallas at 11:47 in the evening. I want to use her name because her name was Lily. I want to say it out loud in this conversation because it has not been said between us, as far as I am aware, in 5 years. Her name was Lily. I said on March 14th, 2019, you and Dad left her funeral before Father Donovan gave the final blessing. I was in the first pew. I heard you leave. I heard the door close. I did not turn around. I said you called me on March 17th, 2019, and you apologized for leaving early. That is the word you used. Early, I wrote it down. I have it in my notes. I said you called 4 more times before June. I answered twice. I did not answer after May. You stopped calling in June. That is the documented sequence of events. I said I have a son. His name is Thomas. He is 7 months old. I want to be precise about something. He is not a resolution to this situation. He is not a reason for this situation to be different than it is. He is a person, and any relationship with him would need to be built on a foundation, and that foundation would need to include an honest accounting of what happened in 2019 and what has happened since. A mutual agreement to move forward without that accounting is not a foundation. It is a floor with nothing under it. My mother was quiet. I heard her breathing. I heard her say something very low that I could not make out. Then she said, "You're right." She said it clearly without qualification. I said, "I need you to say more than that." There was a pause. I counted 12 seconds in my head. She said we should not have left. She said she had told herself that Daddy had needed to get home, and that was true as far as it went, but she also knew, even at the time, that she had been relieved to have a reason to go. She said she had not known how to sit with it, the casket. She could not sit there looking at a white casket with brass handles, and she had failed to recognize until right now, saying it out loud to me, that the ability to look at that casket was exactly what I had needed from her, and she had removed it from the equation. She said she had told herself that leaving before the final prayer was not as bad as leaving in the middle. She said she knew that was not a real distinction. She said she had probably known it at the time. She said, "I think about Lily." She said the name clearly and without stumbling. She said, "I think about her more than you might expect." She said she was sorry she had not said it before. She said she was sorry. She said it 3 times. I held the phone. I looked at the table. There was a mug on the table, and the funeral program was still there from Saturday morning. I said, "I heard you." I did not say I forgive you. I did not say it is okay. Those were not things I was able to verify as true, and I will not state unverified things as fact. She asked whether there was any possibility in time of meeting Thomas. I said I would think about it. She said that was more than she had expected. I said I would be in touch. I hung up. Thomas was in the living room in his bouncer, and I could hear him making the low murmuring sound he makes when he is content, the sound I have described to Calvin as thinking out loud. I sat at the table and I listened to it for a long time. I did not pick up the phone again. I did not call Janet or Celia or Daniel. I just sat and listened to my son making his thinking sounds in the next room, and I held the funeral program in my hands, and I waited until the thing in my chest had settled enough that I could trust my own legs. I met with Janet on April 1st, 2024. I brought the yellow legal pad. I had 23 pages of notes by then. She read through them. She did not comment on individual entries. When she finished, she looked up and said, "What do you want?" I said I wanted to make a decision I could defend to Thomas in 15 years. She said, "And what would that look like?" I said I was still working it out. She said, "What would Lily think?" I sat with that for a moment. I said I did not know. I said Lily was 4 and she loved Percy and applesauce and the bear with the missing button, and she had never had the chance to develop opinions about the consequences of grief and the conditions of reentry. Janet said, "What would you want her to know about how you handled this?" That is the question I have been sitting with since April 1st, 2024, not what I want, what I would want Lily to know about what I chose. I called my parents on April 14th, 2024. I spoke to my mother first and then my father, who came on the line and said my name and then stopped. There was a silence that lasted long enough to be deliberate. Then he said, "I am sorry, Margaret." He said it the way a word comes out when it has been kept somewhere with no ventilation for a long time. I heard it differently than I heard my mother say it, not better or worse. Differently. I said, "I heard you, Dad." I told them I was willing to have one meeting. I said it would be in a location neutral to both households. I said Calvin would be present. I said Thomas would be present. I said I was not making any promises about what came after. I said if either of them attempted to reframe what had happened or minimize it or suggest that the best approach was to simply move forward, I would leave. I said I would not be angry when I left. I would just leave, and they would understand why. My father said, "We understand." My mother said, "Thank you, Margaret." I said I would send a date and time. The meeting took place on May 4th, 2024 at Harvest Table Restaurant on Main Street in McKinney. I chose it because it is well lit and public and quiet on Saturday afternoons. It is 12 miles from our house and 22 miles from my parents' house on Remington Road, and it does not belong to either of us. I made the reservation myself. The table was by the window. Calvin and I arrived at 12:52. Thomas was in his carrier on Calvin's chest. My parents arrived at 1:04. My father is not as tall as I remembered him, or perhaps my sense of proportion has shifted over 4 years of not standing in the same room. My mother's hair is fully gray now, which I had not known because I had not seen her. They came through the door and my mother saw Thomas first. in his carrier against Calvin's chest, and something crossed her face that I am going to document without naming. We were seated. I introduced Calvin to my parents and my parents to Calvin as though these were strangers meeting, which in a meaningful sense they were. My father shook Calvin's hand. Calvin shook it. Calvin said, "I've heard a lot about you." He said it as a statement of neutral fact, which is what it was, and I appreciated the neutrality. My mother asked if she could hold Thomas. I said not yet, maybe before we left if the afternoon went well. She nodded and folded her hands on the table. We ordered, we ate. I did not take the legal pad out of my bag. I had memorized what I needed to say. I said I want to establish one thing at the beginning of this meeting. I said the purpose of today is not to resolve everything that has happened between us. The purpose is to determine whether we can be in the same room without requiring one of us to abandon our account of what occurred. I am not asking you to agree with my interpretation of March 2019. I am asking you to acknowledge that it happened and that it was significant and that the 5 years of silence that followed were also significant. My father looked at the table and then at me. He said it happened. He said it without qualification. He said we left your daughter's funeral and we should not have. He said I cannot explain it in a way that makes it acceptable. He said I am sorry. My mother was pressing her fingertips against the heel of her left hand while my father spoke. The small repeated motion she has done since I was a child when she is managing something. She looked at me when he finished. She said she wanted to say something. I said go ahead. She said that when I was born, I was the most organized infant she had ever seen, that even as a baby, I seemed to know what I wanted and would not stop until I had found a way to communicate it. She said she had always admired that and she had also been afraid of it, afraid of saying the wrong thing to me, afraid of not being equal to my precision. She said she thought the reason she had not called in 5 years was not that she did not love me or did not think about Lily. She said Lily's name clearly. She said she thought the real reason was that she did not know what to say that would be equal to what had happened, and rather than say something that was not enough, she had said nothing. She said that was wrong. She said she had chosen her own comfort over my need, and that was wrong. I sat with this. Calvin had his hand on Thomas's back, a small circular motion. Thomas was looking at my father with his full analytical attention. I said I heard you. We ate. My mother asked about Thomas's sleep and solid food. My father asked about Calvin's practice. Calvin answered both questions with evenness. Thomas fell asleep somewhere between the first and second question to Calvin. At the end of the meal, my mother asked quietly if she could hold him before we left. I looked at Calvin. He gave me a small nod that was not a direction, only a confirmation that the decision was mine. I said yes. My mother held Thomas for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. I counted. She did not say anything while she held him. She looked at him and he woke up mid-hold and looked at her and grabbed her finger with the absolute commitment he brings to grabbing everything. She looked up at me over his head. Her eyes were wet. Neither of us said anything. My father watched from across the table. He did not look away. We left at 2:58. In the parking lot, my mother hugged me. I let her. It lasted approximately 3 seconds, and I did not know what I felt during those 3 seconds. I have had that experience before of not knowing what I feel in real time, and I have learned not to try to name it immediately. In Calvin's car, driving south on Main Street toward 121, he asked how I was doing. I said I did not know yet. He said that's a real answer. I said I knew. I looked out the window at McKinney in May, which is green in the particular low wide way of North Texas in a good spring. I had my coat in my lap. Through the fabric I could feel the shape of the funeral program in the pocket, the single folded piece of white cardstock, her name in script on the front. There have been 2 additional meetings since May 4, 2024. The second was on June 1st at our house on Clearwater Drive. My parents arrived at noon. My mother brought a chicken and rice casserole that she set on the counter without calling it anything. My father walked the backyard with Calvin, who has been building out the raised garden beds since we moved in. I watched them through the kitchen window while my mother sat on the back porch with Thomas. I could see Calvin gesturing at the beds and my father listening with the particular attention of a man who is trying to be present, who knows that being present is the thing he owes right now and is attempting to pay it. There has been no resolution. I want to be precise about that. There has been no moment of catharsis or mutual transformation. There has been no scene in which everything broken became whole. Those scenes exist in a different kind of story. This is the kind of story in which a woman documents. This is the kind of story in which the documentation itself is the act of survival, in which naming dates and times and exact words is not coldness, but its opposite, a refusal to let the record be revised without her permission, in which keeping the program and keeping the folder and keeping the yellow legal pad is a way of saying, I was here, this happened, I know what it was. I am going to address the remainder of this account directly to Robert and Patricia Calloway of Remington Road in Denton, Texas. You had a granddaughter, her name was Lily Rose Calloway. She was 4 years and 2 months old. She had fine blonde hair and she slept with a lavender rabbit named Percy and she called applesauce without cinnamon just applesauce, said it as 2 words, and she loved a book about a bear who could not find his button and she was afraid of ceiling fans and she was not afraid of the dark and she had a laugh that was too big for her body, which came out of her like she was surprised by it every single time. She had a hole in her heart that 4 years of careful medicine could not fix. She died in a room in a hospital that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, and I was beside her. You were not there. You left at 9:47 in the evening on March 9th, 2019, and you were home on Remington Road when she died at 11:47, and I want that on the record in the plainest possible terms because I spent 5 years not saying it plainly, and the time for that is finished. I am also going to say this. Thomas's middle name is Robert. I gave it to him because it is your name, Dad, and because even in 2022 when I chose it, before the voicemail, before any of this, I was not willing to close a door permanently because doors closed in grief have a way of costing more than you calculated when you closed them. Thomas carries your name. That is a choice I made, and I made it with intention. I have not decided what comes next. I am not going to document what comes next because what comes next has not yet occurred, and I will not speculate when I can wait and observe and document instead. What I will say is this: my standard for what comes next is not forgiveness, which is a state I cannot verify in myself. My standard is whether I can look at what I chose in 10 years and 20 years and say it was consistent with who I am, with what I have documented, with the record I have kept since 2014 of what has happened and when and in what sequence. I have kept the funeral program. I will keep it for the rest of my life. I take it out on March 9th and set it somewhere I can see it, and I let the day be what the day is, which is the day my daughter died, which is also the only day in the year on which I permit myself not to have a plan for what comes next. Every other day I document and plan and note times and keep records. On March 9th, I just sit, I hold the program, I let the day be what it is. The program is in the accordion folder now, third shelf from the bottom of the closet in my home office. To the left of the blue binder with Lily's medical records, everything is documented, everything is where it belongs. Her name was Lily. That is the record, that is what I want documented. That is the statement I am entering in full into any account anyone keeps of these events. My name is Margaret Ann Calloway. I am 39 years old. I have one daughter buried at Roselawn Memorial Cemetery on Teasley Lane in Denton, Texas, and I visit her on the 9th of every month, and I have one son who is 10 months old who grabs everything in reach with complete and unguarded commitment, and I am married to a man who hands me a notebook without being asked. I am a senior occupational therapist at Baylor Scott and White Medical Center in Plano, Texas. I earn $82,000 a year as of my most recent review. I have a house, a son, a husband, a therapist, a grief group I attended for 2 years and 3 months, and a blue accordion folder with every document I have ever needed. I am also a woman whose daughter died in a hospital at 11:47 on a Thursday night and whose parents drove home before it happened. Both of those things are the record, both of those things are true, the record does not choose between them, the record holds both. And the program is in the folder, and the folder is on the shelf, and her name is on the front in script, and her name was Lily. I want to add one more thing to this account, something I have not documented before because this account is the first time I have set these events down in their complete sequence, and I want to be thorough. In November of 2019, 8 months after Lily died, I drove to Roselawn Memorial Cemetery on a Saturday afternoon that was overcast and very still. I had been to Lily's grave a number of times by then. I had a routine. I would bring a small arrangement of flowers, usually white roses or lavender, and I would sit in the folding chair I kept in my car trunk for that purpose, and I would talk to her. Not in a mystical way. Not with any particular belief about where she was or whether she could hear me. I talked to her the way you talk to someone who has been in the same room with you for 4 years and is no longer in the room. Because the habit of talking to her was still present even when she was not, and I saw no reason to fight the habit. On this particular Saturday in November, I arrived at the cemetery to find a small pot of yellow chrysanthemums on the grave that I had not put there. I sat in my folding chair and looked at the chrysanthemums for a while. They were fresh. They had been placed within the last day or two. I did not know who had put them there. I considered the possibilities. Daniel visited the grave on the 15th of each month. This was not the 15th. Aunt Celia had been to the grave once in April and had told me about it after. I could not think of anyone else who knew the specific location of the grave in Roselawn's eastern section, row G, plot 14. I took a photograph of the chrysanthemums with my phone. I noted the date in my notes. I did not call anyone to ask about them. In December of 2019, I drove to Roselawn again on a Saturday morning. There were new flowers on the grave, white roses, not chrysanthemums, again fresh. Again, I had not put them there. I sat in my chair. I looked at the white roses. I thought about the casserole my mother brings to every grieving family in her church circle. I thought about the woman who brings flowers to the dead when she does not know how to bring them to the living. I thought about the specific failure that looks like love from the outside and like absence from the inside. I called my mother that afternoon. I had not called her since May. She answered on the first ring, which told me she had my number in her phone still and that she still looked at it when it appeared. I said, "Are you leaving flowers at Lily's grave?" She was quiet for a moment, then she said yes. She said she had been going since September. She said she went on Saturdays in the early morning before anyone else was there. She said she did not stay long. She said she just brought something and stayed for a few minutes and left. I said I didn't know that. She said, "I know." She said, "I didn't think you would want to know, and I wasn't sure I had the right to tell you." I sat with that. I said, "Does Dad go with you?" She said, "Sometimes." I said, "Okay." She said, "I hope that's all right." I said, "It's all right." I said goodbye. I hung up. I have thought about this phone call many times since. I want to be precise about what it changed and what it did not change. It did not change what happened on March 14th, 2019. It did not change the word early. It did not change the 5-year silence that followed. It changed my understanding of what was happening inside the silence. Those are different things. I have tried very hard in this account to keep those things separate, because collapsing them would not be accurate, and accuracy is the only standard I have that I fully trust. My parents were leaving flowers on Lily's grave throughout the period during which they were not calling me. They were present at the cemetery and absent from my life simultaneously. I have documented this. I do not know what to do with it entirely. I have been thinking about it for 4.5 years and I still do not entirely know. I suspect that not entirely knowing is the accurate state and that any version of this story that resolves more cleanly than that is not the version that happened. There is one more document I want to reference. In March of 2023, 6 months before Thomas was born, I was in Janet's office on Legacy Drive for a session. I had brought the yellow legal pad, as I always do. I had been thinking about what to do with my parents' contact information, which I still had in my phone, which I had never deleted. I mentioned this to Janet. She said, "Why haven't you deleted it?" I said, "Because I wasn't certain I wouldn't need it." She said, "For what?" I said, "I didn't know." She said, "Is it possible you've been holding the door open without realizing it?" I said that was possible. She asked if I wanted to close it. She said not as an instruction, just as a question. I sat with that for a while, then I said no. She said okay, she wrote something in her notes. She did not explain what she wrote. I did not delete my parents' contact information. It is still in my phone. It is listed under Mom and Dad the same way it has been since I first put it in a phone in 2001, the year I got my first cell phone, a Nokia that my parents bought me for my 16th birthday so they could reach me when I was out. 23 years in my phone. I did not delete it. What I am saying is this. The door I talk about in this account, the one that Thomas's middle name was meant to hold open, was never fully closed. I need to document that honestly because this account is about what happened, not about the version of events that would make me most legible as either a victim or a forgiver. I am neither of those things entirely. I am a woman who kept a door open while not walking through it for 5 years, who kept her parents' number in her phone, who let her aunt pass along information, who named her son Robert, who said, when asked by her therapist whether she wanted to close the door, no. That is also part of the record. My father's doctor's appointment on the morning of March 10th, 2019, the one he cited the night Lily died as the reason for leaving the hospital, was at 9 in the morning with a Dr. Gregory Walsh on Teasley Lane in Denton. I know this because I asked my mother about it in the June 2024 meeting at our house when my father was in the backyard with Calvin. I asked what the appointment was for. She said it was a routine follow-up for his blood pressure. She said it lasted 20 minutes. She said his blood pressure was fine. I wrote this down. I did not respond to it. I noted it and I added it to the file. I have been thinking in the weeks since the June meeting about the difference between an explanation and an excuse. My father had a blood pressure follow-up at 9 in the morning and he left a hospital at 9:47 the night before, which means he needed approximately 7 hours of sleep before a 20-minute routine appointment. I am not going to say that is an acceptable reason to leave. I am also not going to pretend the appointment did not exist. Both of those things are true, and I am letting them be true simultaneously because the accuracy of this account requires that I hold them both. That is the work I have been doing for 5 years, holding things simultaneously, holding the fact of what my parents did and the fact that they are still my parents, holding the fact of Lily's death and the fact of Thomas's life, holding the funeral program in my coat pocket on May 4th, 2024, at a restaurant in McKinney while my mother held my son for 4 minutes and 20 seconds and grabbed his finger and had wet eyes. I am not a person who finds resolution easily. I do not think I am supposed to. I think the people who find resolution easily have not been paying close enough attention. The things that happen to us are not designed to resolve. They are designed to be documented and examined and held and revisited and held again. I have held this for 5 years. I will hold it for the rest of my life. The accordion folder is on the third shelf. The program is in the folder. Her name is on the front in script. Margaret Ann Calloway, 39 years old. Her daughter's name was Lily. That is what I want entered into the record. That is all. I want to address, as a final section of this account, the question of what I expect from the people I have been writing about, not what I hope for. Expectations and hopes are not the same instrument, and I have learned not to confuse them. What I expect is this. I expect that my parents will continue to come when called. I expect that they will be more careful in the next visit than they were in the last one and slightly less careful in the one after that because that is the nature of people, that their best behavior has a half-life, and that the version of themselves they show in the first 3 meetings is not the version that will still be present in the 15th. I expect this not because I think poorly of my parents, but because I have observed human behavior for 39 years, and this is what human behavior does. It relaxes, it reverts. The question is not whether it reverts, but what it reverts to, and I do not yet know what my parents revert to because I have only seen them under the conditions of repair, which is not their natural condition. I am watching, that is what I am doing. I am watching and I am documenting and I am giving Thomas the opportunity to have grandparents while I keep my own record of who those grandparents are and what they do when things are hard. If things are ever hard again, which they will be, because things are always hard again eventually, I will look at what is in the folder and I will know. I know how to know things, that is the skill I have developed, that is what 4 years of Lily's medical appointments and 5 years of grief documentation and 23 pages of legal pad notes about a single voicemail have given me. I know how to know things, how to wait for the information to be complete before drawing the conclusion, how to hold contradictory data simultaneously without forcing a resolution that the data does not support, how to write the time in the margin without knowing yet why the time will matter. There is a version of this story in which I am a woman who forgave her parents and everything was made whole, and Thomas grew up with grandparents who were fully restored to him and to me, and we sat at holidays together, and the past was a country we all agreed not to visit. I am not that story. I want to be precise about that. I am not that story yet, and I may not become it, and the record should reflect the uncertainty rather than resolve it prematurely. There is also a version of this story in which I am a woman who cut off her family permanently and protected her son from people who had demonstrated their willingness to leave when it counted. That is also not this story. The record reflects that too. What this story is an account of a woman who kept a folder and kept a program and kept her parents' number in her phone, and said no when asked if she wanted to close the door and said yes when asked if she wanted to try one meeting, and sat in a restaurant in McKinney, and let 4 minutes and 20 seconds happen and drove home and did not know what she felt and said that to her husband and heard him say that was a real answer. That is this story, that is what I want in the record. The folder is on the third shelf, the program is in the folder, her name is on the front. Her name was Lily Rose Calloway. She was 4 years and 2 months old. She loved Percy and applesauce and the bear who could not find his button, and her laugh was too big for her body. She had a hole in her heart. She died at 11:47 on a Thursday night and I was there and I held her hand. I held her hand. I want that in the record too. I want that in the record most of all. That I was there. That I held her hand. That I did not leave.